The first time Meredith Vane stepped onto my property, she looked at my muddy work boots like they were a contagious disease that might jump onto her pristine, cream-colored pantsuit. And right then, before she even opened her mouth, I knew the silence I'd paid $300,000 for was about to be broken. See, I didn't come out here to fight. I came to the edge of the Blue Ridge foothills to disappear, to trade 12-hour days staring at spreadsheets in a glass tower for the smell of wet earth and the sound of wind moving through ancient pines. I used to be a forensic accountant in Chicago, which is a fancy way of saying I spent 20 years hunting down money that people didn't want found, digging through layers of corporate shell companies and cookbooks until I found the rot. But that life burns you out. It leaves you cynical and tired. So when I found this 20-acre plot called the Old Miller Place, land that had been deeded before the county even paved the roads, I thought I'd found my sanctuary. The property was rough, overgrown with kudzu and wild blackberry bushes, with a farmhouse that leaned a little to the left like a tired old man. But it was mine, paid for in cash, free and clear. Or so I thought until I saw that black Mercedes Jew-wagon crunching up my gravel driveway, looking about as out of place as a shark in a freshwater pond. I was out by the barn, trying to salvage some siding, when the car door opened and Meredith stepped out, followed by two guys holding clipboards who looked like they were trying very hard to look important. And she didn't introduce herself, didn't say hello. She just pointed a manicured finger at my barn and said, "That structure is non-compliant, Mr. Reed, and frankly, it's an eyesore that drags down the property value of the entire Pinecrest Haven community." I just stood there, wiping my hands on a rag, letting the silence stretch out because in my line of work, you learn that people who are lying or bluffing hate silence. It makes them fill the air with nervous chatter. But Meredith didn't blink. She just smiled this tight, plastic smile that didn't reach her eyes and handed me a thick envelope. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her voice dripping with that fake Southern charm that's more poison than honey. "You're 3 months behind on your HOA dues. And with the fines for the unapproved paint color on the house, plus the penalties for the overgrown vegetation, you're looking at roughly $6,000, payable within 30 days, or we'll have to initiate the lien process." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud because it seemed so absurd, and I told her, "Lady, you might want to check your GPS, because the Pinecrest Haven gate is a mile down the road, and my deed says I'm unincorporated county land, which means the only person I answer to is the county tax assessor and God, and neither of them are standing in my driveway." That's when the temperature dropped about 10 degrees. Her smile vanished like a light switch flipping off, and she took a step closer, lowering her voice so the guys with the clipboards couldn't hear, saying, "You seem like a smart man, Caleb, so listen closely. Maps change, lines get redrawn, and this community has standards that we will enforce, whether you think you're part of it or not. So you can either pay the fees and get with the program, or you can find out exactly how difficult we can make your life." She got back in her car, and they reversed out of my driveway with military precision, leaving me standing there in the dust, holding an invoice for a club I never joined. And while a younger version of me might have just thrown it in the trash, the forensic accountant in me, the guy who spent decades tracking fraudsters, felt that familiar itch at the base of my neck. The one that told me this wasn't just a mistake or an overzealous neighbor, but something systematic, something rot-infested that was trying to spread onto my land. I spent that night going through the paperwork she'd left, which was a masterpiece of legal-sounding gibberish, citing bylaws and expanded jurisdiction zones that referenced a zoning update from 2 years ago. And looking at the map included in the packet, it showed a neat red line swallowing my 20 acres into the Pinecrest Haven Dominion. But having looked at satellite imaging and the original plat maps when I bought the place, I knew for a fact that line was fiction. The next morning, I drove into town to the county clerk's office, a dusty basement room that smelled like old paper and lemon floor wax, hoping to clear this up in 10 minutes. But when I asked for the zoning maps from 2021 through 2024, the clerk, a woman named Mrs. Higgins who had glasses thick as bottle bottoms, gave me a look of pity that unsettled me more than Meredith's threats. "You're the new owner of the Miller Place," she said, not asking but stating, and when I nodded, she lowered her voice and said, "You're the 4th one in 6 years, honey, and the last one. Poor Mr. Henderson, he barely lasted 8 months before he sold out to Mrs. Vane's development group for pennies on the dollar because the legal fees were eating him alive." That stopped me cold. sold to her development group. And suddenly the picture started to sharpen. This wasn't about homeowners' dues or grass height. This was a slow-motion acquisition strategy, a way to bleed owners dry until they handed over the keys. And when Mrs. Higgins pulled the official county maps, sure enough, my property was clearly, undeniably outside the HOA boundaries, with a solid buffer zone of trees between us. I asked her for certified copies of everything, every transfer, every zoning meeting minutes for the last 5 years, and as the printer hummed, Mrs. Higgins leaned over the counter and whispered, "Be careful, Mr. Reed. Meredith Vane's husband is on the zoning board, and her brother runs the largest construction firm in the county. They don't like it when outsiders say no." I drove home with a stack of documents on the passenger seat, feeling the weight of the fight that was coming. But when I turned onto my road, I saw the first sign that the Cold War had gone hot. My front gate, a heavy iron thing that had stood for 50 years, was lying in the ditch, the hinges sheared off with what looked like an angle grinder, and right in the middle of my driveway was a pile of trash, construction debris, old drywall, and broken tiles, dumped right where I'd have to clear it to get to my house. It was petty, it was childish, but it was also a message that said we can touch you. And as I got out of my truck, shaking with a cold kind of rage, I saw a drone hovering about 50 feet up, a little black buzzard watching me, recording my reaction, waiting for me to lose my cool so they could have footage of the unstable neighbor. I didn't wave, I didn't yell, I just pulled out my phone and took a picture of the drone, then a picture of the gate, and then I went inside, poured a black coffee, and called the one person I knew who enjoyed a fight more than I did, my old college roommate, Arthur Pym, a lawyer who operated out of a strip mall in Atlanta and had the morals of a pirate but the legal mind of a grandmaster chess player. Arthur listened to me explain the situation, the silence on the line only broken by the sound of him lighting a cigarette, and when I finished, he let out a long exhale and said, "Caleb, you've stumbled into a classic land squeeze. They want your 20 acres because it's the only flat land left adjacent to their development, probably for a clubhouse extension or a golf course. And they're betting you'll do the math and realize it's cheaper to sell than to litigate." "I'm not selling, Arthur," I told him, looking out the window at the woods I was starting to love. "I'm not letting them bully me off my own dirt." "Good," Arthur said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Then we don't just defend, we go on the offensive. But first you need to lock that place down like Fort Knox, because if they're cutting gates now, they're just testing the waters. Get cameras, get motion lights, and for God's sake, don't talk to her without recording it." The next 2 weeks were a siege, a slow grinding psychological warfare where every morning brought a new violation. One day it was a report filed with the county health department claiming my septic tank was leaking. It wasn't. The next day it was animal control showing up because of a report that I was running an illegal dog fighting ring. I didn't even own a dog yet. And through it all, the drone was there, watching, buzzing, a constant reminder that I was under a microscope. I installed cameras everywhere, hidden in birdhouses, mounted on trees, high-resolution eyes that saw in the dark, and I started building my case file, organizing it the way I used to organize fraud investigations, columns for dates, times, incidents, and potential statutes violated, turning my dining room table into a war room. The escalation point came on a Tuesday night, a humid, heavy evening where the air felt like a wet blanket, and I was awakened at 2 a.m. by the sound of breaking glass and the roar of an engine peeling away. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed and ran to the living room to find a brick sitting in the middle of the floor, surrounded by shattered glass from the bay window, and tied to the brick was a note, not typed this time, but handwritten in jagged, angry letters. "Accidents happen when you don't follow the rules." My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a cold, hard realization that these people weren't just greedy. They were dangerous because they believed they were untouchable, believed that their little fiefdom was the whole world, and I was just a peasant who needed to be crushed. I checked the camera feed and saw a dark SUV. No plates, of course, slow down. A figure in a hoodie throw the brick and speed off, but the camera on the oak tree by the road caught something the others missed, a reflection in the side mirror of the SUV as it passed under the street lamp. Just a split second of a face illuminated by the dashboard lights, but it was enough to see the driver wasn't a hoodie-wearing thug, but a man in a polo shirt, a man I recognized from the board of directors. Photo on the Pinecrest Haven website. Meredith's husband, Richard Vane. That was the mistake, the arrogance that comes before the fall. Because they thought I was just a stubborn farmer, they didn't know I spent my career zooming in on pixelated receipts and connecting dots that no one else could see. I sent the footage to Arthur and I hired a private investigator named Rivera, a guy who looked like a retired linebacker and moved like a shadow, telling him to dig into the Vane family finances, specifically looking for any transfers between the HOA accounts and their personal development company. Rivera called me 3 days later, and his voice was tight with excitement. "Caleb, you are not going to believe this, but this HOA isn't just a neighborhood watch. It's a slush fund. I found payments going to a consulting firm owned by Meredith's sister, and get this, the land they forced Henderson to sell? They bought it using HOA reserve funds as an investment, then sold it to their own company for $1, and then flipped it for $2 million. It was a racket, a classic embezzlement and fraud scheme dressed up in pastel polo shirts and community bylaws, and I had the receipt, but I needed them to hang themselves. I needed Meredith to say it out loud, because juries love a villain who confesses. So I set the trap. I sent an email to Meredith, sounding defeated, sounding broken, telling her I was tired of the fighting and the damage to my house, and I was ready to discuss compliance terms, if she would just meet me to explain what exactly I needed to do to stop the harassment. She took the bait instantly, her reply coming within 10 minutes, sugary sweet and triumphant, agreeing to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop on the edge of town, to welcome me properly. I walked into that coffee shop wearing my oldest jeans and a flannel shirt, looking every inch the defeated man she wanted to see, and she was already there, sitting in a booth, sipping an iced latte, radiating victory. "I'm glad you came to your senses, Caleb," she said as I sat down. "It's really for the best. The community needs to be cohesive, and frankly, you are never going to win against the board." I looked down at my hands, playing the part. I don't have the money for the lawsuits, Meredith, the brick through the window, the gate. It's too much. If I pay the $8,000, does it stop? Does the vandalism stop? She laughed, a soft, cruel sound. "Oh, Caleb, don't be naive. The fees are just the entry ticket. We need to discuss the easement for the golf course expansion. We're willing to offer you a fair price for the back 5 acres, and if you agree to that, well, I can assure you that accidents will cease immediately. And if I don't?" I asked, looking up, meeting her eyes. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Then the county inspectors will find code violations you didn't even know existed. My husband Richard will have your road access condemned for safety reasons. We will bury you in so much red tape and litigation that you'll be begging us to take the land for free just to make it stop. That's how the world works, honey. We built this town, and we decide who stays." I let the silence hang there for a second, memorizing her face, the arrogance of it, and then I smiled, a real smile this time, the smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. "You know, Meredith," I said, leaning back, "that sounds a hell of a lot like extortion and conspiracy to commit fraud." Her eyes narrowed. "Who are you going to tell? It's your word against the pillars of the community." "Well," I said, tapping the pen in my shirt pocket, which was actually a high-fidelity digital recorder, "I think I'll tell the district attorney, the State Bureau of Investigation, and the judge presiding over the RICO lawsuit my lawyer is filing this afternoon." Her face went pale, the blood draining out of it so fast she looked like a ghost. You can't record me. That's illegal." "Actually," I said, standing up, "this is a one-party consent state, Meredith. I checked the statutes. You just confessed to racketeering, extortion, and admitted your husband's involvement in the vandalism. The police are probably picking him up right about now based on the video evidence I submitted this morning." I walked out of that coffee shop, leaving her sitting there with her mouth open, her iced latte sweating on the table, and I drove straight to the courthouse where Arthur was waiting with a stack of files so thick it looked like a phone book. The ensuing legal storm was less of a battle and more of a demolition. When we walked into court 2 weeks later for the emergency injunction hearing, Meredith brought a team of high-priced lawyers who looked ready to argue about boundary lines and zoning technicalities, but they weren't prepared for a criminal conspiracy case. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patterson who had zero patience for bullies, listened to the recording in open court, her expression growing darker with every sentence Meredith spoke on the tape. When the recording ended, the courtroom was dead silent. the kind of silence where you can hear a pin drop, and Judge Patterson peered over her glasses at Meredith, who was shrinking into her seat. "Mrs. Vane," the judge said, her voice like grinding stones. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a brazen abuse of power. You haven't just harassed this man. You have weaponized the legal system and local government for personal gain. This is not a homeowners association. This is a criminal enterprise." The ruling was swift and brutal. An immediate permanent restraining order, a dissolution of the current HOA board pending a forensic audit, which I helped coordinate, naturally, and a referral to the district attorney for criminal charges against Meredith and Richard Vane. But the real victory wasn't the gavel coming down, it was what happened afterward. The investigation blew the lid off everything. Richard Vane resigned from the zoning board in disgrace. The construction company was raided by the FBI for bid rigging, and Meredith traded her cream-colored pantsuits for an orange jumpsuit after pleading guilty to 3 counts of fraud to avoid a longer sentence. A few months later, I was sitting on my front porch, the newly repaired gate standing strong at the end of the driveway, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold, and I saw an old truck pull up. It was Silas, my nearest neighbor to the west, a man who hadn't spoken 10 words to me since I moved in. He walked up the steps, holding a bottle of homemade moonshine, and sat down on the rocking chair next to me without asking. "Heard things have been quiet," Silas said, looking out at the treeline. "Quiet is good," I replied, taking the jar he offered. "We had a bet going," he said, cracking a half-smile. "Me and the others. Bet you'd last 6 weeks. Henderson lasted 4 months. You took the whole damn kingdom down." I took a sip of the shine. It burned like gasoline and honey, and felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the alcohol. "I just wanted to be left alone, Silas," I said. "That's the thing." He nodded, looking at me with a newfound respect. "Folks like that, they count on good people just wanting peace. They think peace means weakness. You showed him that sometimes, to get peace, you gotta be willing to burn the whole war machine down." We sat there until the stars came out, listening to the crickets and the wind in the pines, and for the first time since I bought the place, the silence didn't feel heavy, it felt earned. The Pinecrest Haven HOA still exists, but it's different now. New leadership, humble folks who just want to make sure the streetlights work, and they give my property a wide berth, treating my boundary line like an international border that is not to be crossed. My farm, the old Miller place, is thriving now. The barn is fixed, the garden is producing enough tomatoes to feed an army, and the air smells sweeter than it ever did. Maybe because it's the smell of freedom, of knowing that no matter how much money or power someone thinks they have, they can't take what's yours if you have the truth and the backbone to stand your ground. But it makes me wonder, looking back at it all, how many people out there gave up? How many Hendersons sold their dreams because they thought they couldn't fight City Hall, or in this case, the HOA president? It's a scary thought, realizing that the systems meant to protect communities can be twisted into weapons by petty tyrants. And it makes you ask yourself, if someone knocked on your door tomorrow with a fake invoice and a threat, would you fold to keep the peace, or would you dig in your heels and fight, even if it meant risking everything you'd built? Because let me tell you, looking at this sunset from a porch that is 100% undeniably mine, the fight is worth it. So what do you think? Was I too harsh recording her? Or did she get exactly what she deserved? And have you ever had a neighbor who thought they were the sheriff of the street? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one of them. Take care of yourselves, and remember, read the fine print, and never, ever let them see you blink.